Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of StreamTime Sports. I'm your host Nick Meacham and thrilled to be back with you once again to take another look at this crazy industry we're in sports and sports media. This week, we're off to Germany to talk to a good friend of ours, Andreas Heyden, who is the CEO of Dyn Media. And I have been dying to talk to him for some time now. He's gone through quite a journey with launching a new platform out there, which we've got a lot to, for those that aren't aware of it, there's a lot of information to provide. But Andreas, before we dig into some of the detail behind Dyn Media, which I think is a real disruptor in our sports media space, so lots to cover. Firstly, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that you make me so jealous, because every time I look on my Instagram, I see photos of you either at live sports events or drinking incredible coffee. And it does surprise people when I tell them that good coffee is actually hard to come by in Jamaica. So, Andreas, firstly, are you spending a lot of time still at live sports events these days? I imagine with the job, it goes hand in hand.
Oh, definitely. So the combination out of live sports and good coffee, that's also a nice challenge we can talk about. Generally speaking, after being 7 years in football, now covering or being the home of sports for 5 different sports: volleyball, basketball, table tennis, handball, hockey. It is something that I try to get into by being on the ground, listening to the fans, listening to their view and their wishes towards experience those incredible sports. And if I go somewhere to a live sports ground, the first thing I Google is specialty coffee. And before I head to the stadium, I get a good one, because at the stadium, you rarely get a good one.
Yeah, that is very true. I think I'm yet to have a decent coffee at any sports ground. So there's maybe an opportunity for sports stadiums to have a look at. But Andreas, really important question. What's your go-to coffee? What's your favorite? Is it a flat white? Is it something else that you normally go with?
It depends on the time of day. So I try to strictly follow the 11, no cappuccino after 11 o'clock. And I think the 5th or 6th coffee at the day, it's getting more and more towards espresso or double espresso. So I try to cut down at 7, have the last coffee.
5th or 6th coffee. Wow, you are putting me to shame. I used to be a 5 or 6 cups guy, but I found that I wasn't burning enough energy to sleep when I drank that much. Particularly, I was after 2 o'clock is my cutoff with coffee. Okay. I drink normally filter in the morning and a flat white sometime during the day is my go-to. But anyway, we're not here to talk about coffee, although do check out Andreas's Instagram if you want to get jealous and see what real good coffee looks like. Because even when I moved to the UK, it was one shop in the whole of London that sold a flat white coffee, and that was run by Australians and Kiwis. And since then, it's exploded over the last 10, 15 years. So I'm glad to see the world is finally catching up to Australia when it comes to coffee. Sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if you haven't heard, we are heading to Manhattan for Sports Pro New York. On the 18th and 19th of March, you can hear from industry innovators such as LPGA Tour Commissioner Molly Marcoux Samaan, SVP of ESPN Plus, John Lasker, CEO of Fubo TV, David Gandler, and Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, to name but a few. Come to be inspired and learn how to successfully navigate the major opportunities in modern sports media. Book your place today at newyork.sportspro.com, and listeners to this podcast can get 20% off by using the code PODCAST at checkout. Terms and conditions apply, and this offer is not applicable to pre-existing purchases. I want to talk a bit about you, Andreas, and talk about Dyn Media. Now, let's take a step back to the beginning point of this, because for those that aren't familiar with Dyn Media, just talk us through a bit of the journey. Your background is obviously being CEO of DFL's digital business, worked heavily with Christian Seifert at Bundesliga. So talk us through how all this came together.
The founding idea of Dyn is that each fan, each player, each club owner loves their sport equally. Whether you are a handball guy or you're a football guy or a soccer for the American audience, or you are a cricket fan, there is no difference in love towards the sports. There is a big difference in the accessibility of that content. And in Germany, especially, in no other European countries is there such a big step in media audience between the first sport, which is football, and then handball, the second sport, because it was hidden behind paywalls. It was not accessible through club platforms, through player platforms, through social media. Our former licensees with Sky for handball and Deutsche Telekom for basketball, they have done a great job for the live product, but they haven't really helped the sport to grow. And our idea is to take those sports and apply new rules of media towards those sports, to take them out of the niche and bring them closer to the fan. And when Christian first shared me his idea on his way out of the DFL, I was in the first second fond of it, because for me, I think the democratization of access to sport was about to happen. And this is something what we now try to achieve.
Definitely. And when I heard the model, when I saw what you guys were presenting as the concept, it makes a truckload of sense, not only because it's being underserved across mainstream platforms, particularly now with the data that broadcasters are able to develop on audiences. They're more picky on what they're spending money and airtime, I suppose, on content, but equally because of the lack of access to even the shoulder content, and the coverage around these sports is really, really low. Now, one thing I think is interesting, there has been a number of other companies that now are doing this sort of type of thing, targeting the challenge area, but they're more doing it through the lens of, we want to be a lower tier, almost bootstrapped startup trying to do this. You guys found a pretty good partner to bring on board. Perhaps I don't know the German market well, but I would say Axel Springer is probably the number one media company, media conglomerate in Germany, if not one of the top ones. And they've made major acquisitions in the US with major media companies like Politico for a tune of reported $1 billion plus, and Business Insider for nearly 500 million, 450 US equivalent. So big money, big deals. So you've got the power of Axel Springer and the financial clout, perhaps, to make sure you're making the right investments. Whereas some other organizations have made different bets in this space, but have very dipped the toe into the water. So it feels like, for me, there's a big commitment from Axel Springer, from Dyn, from Christian, etc., to really give this a great chance. How's it been, firstly, working with someone like an Axel Springer? Have they been heavily involved? Is it something that they've given you the keys to go with, given your background? What's the dynamic like?
Yeah, I think for us, we always come from these three levels: reach, rank, revenue. And only by having a partner like Axel Springer, who offers the audience, they are the sixth largest media company now in the world, and in Germany, a clear number one when it comes to eyeballs towards news and their competence in sports. It is something where we give rights to Axel Springer. They broadcast free games on Sunday for basketball and handball on their properties. We have access to editorial content. They are promoting us. We are helping them to grow new business. It's a really win-win-win situation, with the sport getting more audience and telling better stories, Axel Springer opening up a new category for TV rights and for editorial content, and for us in growing the business and having Axel Springer as a shareholder. It's just a great experience. And I worked, I think, nearly with all big media companies in Germany, and definitely not a charity organization, but they have a very clear understanding of the business and a very, very high competence in sport, and they're great people to work with. I think what is missing in those sports, and that takes me to rank, is how do we make a handball story as part of the pop culture? How do we create stories of the players, the legacy of the clubs, these amazing content and sport that is happening there, and make this as an experience that can be consumed, as stories to be told on Axel Springer's big online and print properties, but also on the social media of the clubs and of the players, where we give them live footage. Because at the end, sure, we need to create revenue, and this is done by the combined revenue. And you pointed out it before. Sure, we have subscription revenue, that's our core revenue, but we're creating much more eyeballs and audiences for advertisers and sponsors, be it for us or be it even for the clubs, where suddenly national sponsors are going into local sponsoring because they gain national reach through us and the Axel Springer properties.
Yeah, that reach is super important, particularly for challenger, tier 2, 3 sports, whatever you want to define that mix. And as you've outlined from the beginning, but just for those that sort of want to get a sense of those rights, you're talking about the German leagues for handball, basketball, and volleyball. You have also the European Champions League for handball. So that's European wide. And I think you've recently done a deal with World Table Tennis as well for content on there, and hockey as well, right? So you're talking about the national leagues. When I've talked to people about the German market, they have historically said it's football and nothing else, has historically been the mix. Yet we all know that sports don't work like that. People play and experience other sports. So the idea was brought to you with Christian. You guys talked about it, worked out a game plan. How long did it take from that first conversation to actually launching the brand of Dyn Media, and then launching June or July last year, I think it was, when you actually went live to broadcasting on through the airs?
From idea to today, less than 22 months. And this is live, now being live for 4 months. So let me take you on the journey. In the first half of 2022, the rights were acquired. From the content philosophy, we said we don't want to become the Netflix of sports, where you see from rugby to cricket to handball to basketball to, you name it, lacrosse, and sometimes a little bit volleyball in between. But we wanted to buy those rights in the definition of a home off. How can we aggregate the most rights for a dedicated sport? For example, for handball, we have the first league, we have the second league, we have the National Cup, we have the Women's League, we have the Euro League, we have the Champions League, and we have the Euro Cup. So this is where we have one stop for those sports, because we believe that for second, third tier, as you may want to call them, it doesn't make sense for the fan to have multiple subscription because the perceived value of those is not high enough. So we are very thankful for the trust that those leagues and competitions have put in us for creating those home of those rights, and creating then an OTT experience which represents this home off is something that we've put a lot of work in. So this was the first half of 22. By summer, we got the last big rights package with handball. We took roughly half a year to conceptualize our editorial content, our production, because we had to build a production, our OTT. A couple of days before Christmas and New Year's Eve, all contracts were signed. And on the 7th of January last year, we started building, and 8 months later, we went live.
So how big's the team now, Andreas? You've been building. So you've got people across production, broadcasting, in front of camera. You've got marketing, sales teams. What's the scale of Dyn now?
So in our FTE, we got 63 in Cologne. Then we have a big partner with NAP, one of the largest TV production companies in the world, with whom we have built remote production facilities in Cologne and Munich. And Spontent, which is a fourth tier, third tier production company for sports. I would say they are the first and the second line. Both together, I would say on a match day, roughly 200, 250 people throughout the whole match day are in the various productions. We have roughly 150 freelancers, 40 commentators and moderators, faces and voices around the camera. And we have now produced 1,200 games since the 23rd of August, and we have today the 6th of February, and still 1,000 to go until end of season.
Well, you're looking great, all things considered, considering how many shows you've been doing. Let's thank the coffee as much as anything else, keeping you firing and full of good spirits. Before we move into the business side of the business challenges and the business model, we'll talk a little bit about the production bit, just because we're talking about that now. Now, with your background, people that have heard you speak at events or heard speak even on a pod when you were one of our first guests on the podcast when we kicked off, a couple of years ago now, was you're a big proponent of technology and its impact and innovation into this space. So just talk me through, what have you done? So I'm imagining, to sort of set the scene a little bit, you're looking at a building a business around these sports properties that have historically been underserved, you still have to make sure you're finding that nice balance between efficiency and investment and cost savings, right? To make sure you're running the model, the right business model. Because if you invest too much, it won't take much for this to completely blow your P&L out of the water. So I'm just curious, what sort of technology have you been using? We're hearing a lot of talk about AI and other different types of production tools that are helping you deliver this strategy to bring this all to life.
When I talk about products, I always start with the customer. When I talk about production, I start with the people working in production. And what we see in Germany in the post-Corona time and the Gen Zs moving now into the workspace, we need to take the work to the people and not the people to the work. And this has many, many benefits. Reducing the CO2, the carbon footprint, reducing travel and logistics cost. And very early in the early stage, we said we need to create a hybrid model where we have high quality cameras in the stadiums, but we have remote production facilities where people come by bike to our office or to the Munich office, do not just one game somewhere in the outskirts of somewhere in Germany, but maybe even 2 games on one day, and leave in the evening and are back with their family for dinner. And that's the first part. The second part was pure economical view on it just doesn't make sense to have 7.5 ton trucks driving to Germany and not just 1, but 2, and have satellite connections, and the people need to sleep in hotels and need catering and toilets and everything. It just doesn't make sense. We take now a Sprinter, which is a van, a bigger van. There are cameras in. There are venue kits in, which are in the size maybe of combined 2 fridges. We roll them into the stadium, set the cameras up, plug the cameras in and the data feed and the microphones. And on the other hand, we've put to 38 locations fiber. You plug the fiber in and the camera signals are taken from the venue to the remote production facility, where people are sitting, editing with touch screens and stream decks, like the current generation on Twitch is working, but in a high quality output. We take all those signals not into big rooms with lots of monitors, no, but into the cloud with AWS. The signals never leave the cloud. So all the playout systems are browser-based. All the distribution signals are we have, 6 to 7, 8 inputs per game and 6 to 7 outputs with 26 games in parallel. Try to do that with hardware. We're doing that in the cloud with software with the AWS tools. And from there out to AWS, out to Akamai and to the customer. So from the glass to glass, it's all virtual. It's all in a high quality. It's a high quality streaming where we are now in the situation to have signals available everywhere at the same time when it comes to post-editing or live editing, which saves so much resources in the whole production value chain. And the people are happier.
I mean, it sounds like it's a pretty comprehensive production still. What aspects of AI tools like cameras or even highlights tools or systems are you using to make that improve the efficiency from a production perspective as well?
In the first slice of the glass on the camera level, we installed in every stadium of handball and basketball a Pixelot AI camera to create additional pictures, but also, as we are working on the forefront of innovation, have a backup system. And if the whole production breaks down, hasn't happened yet, we can switch to the AI camera and get at least the promise to the customer we always broadcast. In the output at the end, we work with tools like WSC when it comes to long-time customer, when it comes to AI editing from highlight cuttings. We are using a lot of Gen AI in our artwork when it comes to marketing because you don't need to buy picture rights of fans anymore. You just generate them and don't show their hands. Then it looks great. Even now models where you can show hands. In between, we are experimenting. The thing that I see currently is in our brand, we are very real. we are very no frills. We are lots of no shine. We're very authentic and try to be in the storytelling very authentic. So all trials that we have done with virtual commentators, stuff like that, it didn't work out yet. Underneath stuff like video to text, audio to text, and working with this text in the distribution and metadata, etc. That's nowadays normal work where we use the most common tools.
Absolutely. Okay, interesting. So now you're up and running. You've got this like a well-oiled machine now, no doubt, Andreas, with everything that's been published. I'm just curious, where's it being distributed to? So you have relationships, with different partners and platforms, and you talked about OTT. Just where are all the places that Dyn Media is now available for the customer?
Let's start with the end customer. First, in the end customer relationship, we started with being available on Sky, on Deutsche Telekom, where handball and basketball were before, on Samsung and Sony. From there, we opened up to Chromecast, we opened up to Amazon Fire TV platform, to Philips, to Panasonic. Every week we do a couple of 20, 30 new Android devices. On top of that, we are currently in the certification process for LG, and we are starting the development for the Apple TV soon, which then takes us, I would say, for devices of the last 4 to 5 years of roughly 70 to 80%. And importantly, on the ones that people really use, because everybody has an old Samsung from 2017 somewhere, but you don't use it. If you want to use it, you just plug in a €20 Amazon Fire TV stick or a Chromecast stick. So we're coming there from the customer, broad coverage, at least for the last 4 to 5 years. And in Germany, the Euro football is coming up. It's always a time where people buy new TVs, and we are all on those TVs. Secondly, when it comes to end customer, we are delivering signals to the public broadcasters. We have a large output deal with ARD and ZDF, which are the BBCs of Germany. I don't know how they're called in Jamaica, but they're the BBCs of Germany. And they have the right to take content for their news access. They have a right for live games that they show on public TV, which is very, very important for the audience, to create audience and create also for the sponsors eyeballs. And for sure, our Axel Springer as our shareholder, they're doing digital on their platforms, but also on Welt, which is a channel they run in Germany, where they show the handball and basketball games. And on top of that, we have lots of partners in the betting space where we deliver signals to. But this is it's more a small business model, but more a signal delivery.
Interesting. So you're being distributed in a lot of different places. Anecdotally, here in Jamaica, I have a Roku TV, which is part of the house that I'm renting. Actually, about six Roku TVs. They seem to have bought more than they need, but they don't have access to any of the main apps over here because I think the TVs are so old. So I am now void of having the access that I used to on all the apps, bar I think the NBA is about the only one on over here of sports dedicated apps. But anyway.
And you would never use the VPN?
No, never at all. So look, I'm just looking in terms of the model there. You talked about lots of ways of distributing, getting more value out of those rights, which I'm sure was a key component of doing some of those deals. So let's shift into the monetization bit a little bit. Obviously, the founding principle of the core Dyn business was built around a subscription-based model. I think the price was around, on launch, was about €14.50, if I remember correctly, on launch. And I don't know what the price is at this point, if that still holds true.
For sure.
That's the same.
We promised price stability in the first time. And it's €14.50 for monthly and €12.50 if you commit to a year. And that's the main source of revenue. We have additional sources of revenue. There is one part which is advertising, where we ourselves sell advertising and sponsoring, but also we are now looking into enabling an ad server for specific content on our platform. We are in the business of sub-licensing content, which generates a revenue stream, but the focus of ours for revenue maximization is surely on giving the fans access that they value for a price point that is fair. And I have to say, at the end, the fans have always complained that it's impossible to watch. Now it's their time to buy.
Absolutely. So the big conversation in the whole industry is about the best way to monetize sports. And we haven't talked a little bit about the non-live content you are producing, which we can maybe touch upon in a second. But just generally, the model that you've launched with, we're seeing a lot of sports broadcasters take a hybrid approach now, where they're basically just adding advertising on top of the subscription model. And it seems to be going down fairly well with consumers by and large. I'm not hearing any studies to show that it's really pushing people in the wrong direction. So just how have you found that the thesis was launch a platform with these different sports properties and subscription will be the core revenue driver? How have you found the appetite for subscription? My theory going into this was there's going to be a huge pent-up demand for something like this. But on the flip side of that, you've got fans who've never had to pay because they've never had the service available. So you then have to go through this sort of marketing education of, hey, you've got this offering now that you've never had before. Now it's time to spend money on something you've never spent before. Did you find, that's my own theory rather than any backed up by any maths. How have you found that the appetite? Has it been a challenge to get people to understand and adopt the subscription? Perhaps easier than expected, harder than expected? What's been the mix like over the first 12 months or 6 months?
I would say 2, 2, 1. The first two are handball and basketball. They have always been behind the paywall, and there was barely any free content. So for them, it is an upside where we are cheaper than the previous licensees. And on top of that, we make more content available and we add real editorial content like shows and magazines towards it. So for them, it was a better deal for a lower price with more content. It was quite easy to have the first cohort of the hardcore fans and prior customers have them converted in. Here we are now at the point, how can we take this into the pop culture and make it broader in the approach for fans who may have never bought something before as pay, and now through the European Handball Championship that happened, or through great dunks, get into the experience and try the offer. The second two sports are, and this is quite homogeneous for those two rights. The second two are volleyball and table tennis. They were before free on Twitch, and we moved them to the behind the paywall. In the same time, we worked on production value, editorial content around it, and those fans, and now many customers have understood that actually it's the only way to move their sports forward. And with €12.50 or €14.50, it's quite affordable. And if you don't want to pay in summer, then churn and come back come 2 months later when the season starts again. And that's fully okay for me. We have to respect customer behavior there, but they are valuing it and they finally can see it in their devices. Sure, you can have the Twitch client installed on your Samsung, but is it convenient? No. They have now the Dyn app, they have their home of volleyball, they have the home of table tennis, and now with deepening the rights like the WTT, this is something where they're very happy. The third one is the one, and that's hockey. Hockey is now being broadcasted on YouTube from us to help the clubs, give them a testing ground to professionalize and upscale their production, etc. And we're going to move them onto the platform by August, September next year when the season starts again for hockey. And hopefully we can repeat this positive experience that we have as table tennis and volleyball.
So Andreas, I know from talking to you before, you're a big tech guy, a big data guy. What are some of the interesting trends perhaps you've noticed from, since going live with regards to consumption? Are you seeing that there's a lot of crossover in interested sports, or are they single sport fans and they are only consuming what they are watching, or is there anything else that you've really learned since going live?
I think the most important learning for me is there is no everything watcher, der Allesgucker. I can't really there is not this one person, a little bit like the American culture where you turn on ESPN, or back in the day, ESPN cable, you didn't know what's going to happen, or ABC Sports or NBC, and you just watch sports. You have a very dedicated fandom for a specific sport. Caveat to that is we are fostering it. in how we have designed the platforms. So if you are a handball fan, you leave Dyn and you come back, you always get greeted in the sport you lastly watched. So if you are a handball fan, you watch basketball, then you come back to basketball. But generally speaking, people come back to the sport that they have left and they keep on watching. The second data point for me, which was very surprising, was an average fan watches about 15 hours in a month and comes back 10 times. And even more interesting for me, 20% of the live games reach is done in real life, because we have lots of games in parallel, and the last 20 minutes of a game of handball and basketball, as there is so much happening in contrast to to football, people like to watch another hour the 3 other games that were in parallel, but only in the last 20 minutes. So for us, building the platform spoiler free was very important. You can always go into the game, into the live, and you, even though the game or in the perceived live, you can restart the game, but you don't see the result. So you will never see an any UI. You see a result of a game because people asked us to do so. The third one is for me, and it's a double-edged sword, I think how you say in English, is the amount of devices that people use. So by our policy, you can register up to 4 devices. Only 2 are used in parallel, allowed, because we have so much games that are happening in parallel. But you see 3.5 devices in average being registered. And there are cases when we did a little bit the cut down to 2 in parallel, where people said, but there are 3 games happening. I have my tablet, I have my iPhone, and I have my TV, and I want to watch those 3 games in parallel. So for us, when we go into product exploration into the future, is there a multi-viewing experience? Is there a more easier way to switch between channels or offerings? This is stuff that now influences the product roadmap based on these data insights.
Really interesting. I definitely wouldn't have thought that would be the average. I thought that would be, there might be a percentage of audiences at that scale, but certainly not as an average. So it just goes to show that for those that I guess are in the business, that how important that device framework is to the deal that clients or customers are signing up to. Andreas, looking towards those relationships you have with some of the sports properties, I'm just curious as to typically, from a sports broadcaster's perspective, normally traditional media rights deal, a deal is done. There is some collaboration, but it's fairly transactional. You buy the live rights, then go to work, and there's some collaboration, but it's light touch. I'm imagining that this would be slightly different because of where their journey is in terms of audience and the need for a platform like yours in a market like Germany. I'm not putting words in your mouth there, but I'm curious as to how are they helping you market Dyn to their audiences? Is there something specific as a strategy you have in place with them? Is it just it's good for everyone, so they're just doing it actively because win-win, so to speak? Or do you have a specific approach?
So we have very, I would say, tough contracts done by very professional lawyers and big ambitions at the same time, and big ambitions for the leagues and for us. In history, if you were a licensee, you may have negotiated in your rights that you have access to matchday footage, but it was like ordering a VHS cassette that you got 6 months later. Please allow 6 weeks for delivery. We believe that this maybe was a technical necessity back in the day, maybe, or it was on their strategy. Our strategy is completely different. We have launched the Content Desk. The Content Desk is a central input and output platform where we put our live games in, where we put near live content in, where our clubs and players put content in, where we got data coming in. We have content from the leagues coming in, all being together by a rights and roles concept, where the club and the league get access to this content immediately after final whistle, sometimes even during the game, where media partners of the Dyn Media network, which are now roughly 24 partners with large regional newspapers now have access for their digital coverage of the Göttinger Startblatt or Stuttgart or Frankfurt or Hamburg. They have access now to content, and the league itself, the clubs can market this content with their own sponsors, which are then put in front of the matchday highlights. And I think this is something which is unparalleled until now, where we not just give the rights back, but also give access to this content at the fingertips.
And so you're seeing them really take advantage of that, or have you had to give some education about that opportunity? Because I imagine that's something that they've not done before, and also that I'm guessing that some of the teams they had internally might not have been fit for purpose to leverage some content like that. How have you found that?
Have you worked at Dyn? This is it's a completely right observation from the outside. Before launching Dyn, we did various workshops where we shared knowledge across the leagues. It was the first time the social media manager, the marketing, the PR managers were in one, at that time, virtual rooms, or sometimes we did 3 sessions, 3 workshops in presence where we took them, showed them the tools that we are developing, educated them how to tell them, how to work with that. We have lots of feedback cycles, so the clubs are obliged to produce content during the match that they provide to us within the content desk that we may even use in live or afterwards in the highlights to tell them, okay, a 30-minute interview is not as efficient as maybe a punchy 30 seconds interview. This is a higher chance. And if this 30 seconds interview is behind the logo wall of your sponsor, awesome, great for you. We have great content. You're producing it, and we take it to life and have more content to show. And this continuous feedback cycle of telling them thumbs up, thumbs down in the content to tell them, have we used it? Is it usable? This is something where these clubs, I really have to pay my big respect to them. They were very open to learn what we have learned in the context of football, of Bundesliga, what has learned, because nobody before us has told them how to do it or has given them inputs how to do it. And if you now take a look at the stuff that they are now, after just a couple of months, how their Instagram game has upscaled by taking game footage and taking a content creator, a local one, creating local relevance, making a reel out of it, and suddenly it's tens of thousands, maybe sometimes hundreds of thousands of views. This is complete reach, coming back to the reach rank revenue model that they had never had before. And I think we're there on a good journey.
So you're talking about working a lot with your sports properties and partners there to get most value out of it. I looked quickly online to look at some of the social media channels that Dyn has as well. And what was interesting is you have created dedicated channels for some of the sports versus having just a single hub. Just curious as to the why there. Why some people would say benefit is just to grow one big audience base on one channel, which versus having that sports specific approach. Firstly, why take that approach, and has it played out as expected? It looked like that from what I did see that some of the numbers on the single sports channels were higher than the main channel. I'm guessing that was the hope.
Yes. So it depends on the algorithm and the platform. So we haven't launched TikTok yet. We haven't really gotten into the Facebook game, but for if we just concentrate on Instagram, the way how the algorithm works differently to the TikTok algorithm, it still shows you more content of what you have subscribed and a higher relevance if you react to it, and keeps you feeding with those content. And the hypothesis before was that there is not the everything watcher. And if we would go on the umbrella channel of Dyn Sports too deep in one sport, A, it would get dominated by the sport with the most content. B, it would massively confuse the algorithm what to show, because it doesn't have a clear positioning. So for us, the Dyn Sport is a little bit the house of highlights. We just show the best of the best. We feature a little bit the company, the faces, the voices, and tell stories around it. And then we go, and handball is the largest channel. They're very, very deep, where we produce massive content of reels, of posts, of stories, etc., for the handball interest people, because something like the overlap of a handball fan and a basketball fan is about 15%, and you want to keep the algorithm clean.
So looking at you mentioned that some of the teams and the stakeholders you've been working with were very interested to learn from you with regards to what you could take from football. What is the compare and contrast there that you've seen? Is there anything, Andreas, that stands out to you that's different from a football fan and the consumption you've seen versus what you may be seeing across Dyn's channels, whether it be social or through the main channels? Is there anything discernibly different that you might has surprised you or interested you?
Yeah. I would say that on the one hand side, and I don't want to talk about football, but football is more in a more competitive space between fans, I would say. So effects like hooligans and pyro, and you don't see that happening in those sports. If you are in handball in a Final Four, or in the Euro, you have people dressed up and being crazy and painted, being at the stadium, but in four corners, and you don't see any police or something like this. So this is something that I really value a lot. You see very little racism, very little gender-based negative effects happening, etc. So this is something I really, really like about the handball community. And I would say the football fan is well fed from content. The other fans are still hungry. And I'd rather feed a hungry fan than trying to force feed a fully fed fan.
Interesting. Right. I'm conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left, Andreas. I want to sort of wrap on two key points. Just one is quickly with the German market. We've talked about them a little bit, but there is a real dominant player in Sky Deutschland there. There are other broadcasters as well who have sports rights, which you've talked about. How have you found the penetration into that market? Have you found, I've seen Sky in other markets, they work in this beautiful frenemy model of, we'll happily bring you in under the right conditions, but also keep your arms linked. I'm just wondering, how have you found the dynamic with working with them? And finding your place within the core, those core channels? Has it been relatively straightforward, or has it been a bit tricky to find your space in that place?
So winning rights over somebody else is always a disappointment for the one who didn't get the rights. What I really value, Sky and Deutsche Telekom, that they have understood they are, next to being a rights owner, a massive aggregation platform, and being able to offer to their customers a product like Dyn, where they can expand their positioning with now offering handball or basketball on Sky, or handball on Magenta, with these kind of models. This is something fair sport. I think we are in a co-competition for rights. As we won't be moving into football, I think we are there, not at least for the next years, not in the competition for those rights.
And innately, that aggregation approach they've got, which they've got in a number of markets, does take the edge off some of the competition around media rights, it feels like, at the top end, but maybe more in the football sense, because we've seen what's happened in the UK, particularly, where I could go down another rabbit hole about that journey of the last 10 years, but I'll leave that for another pod. Look, one final question, I guess, for you, Andreas, is really just what's next here? You've been through this journey. It sounds like from what you've talked about through on the pod today is largely as planned in terms of the thesis and the approach. What's next? I saw the WTT deal, and it felt like, is this a starting point of you expanding your rights portfolio to include more than just the German market? What is next on Dyn's radar?
I would say it's more about deepening existing sports. So whenever there are interesting rights coming up for our 5 sports, to go deeper and create more value to the customer for their subscription. It depends on the price point. But I think with the proposition of having those fans, it doesn't really make sense to go with the volleyball rights to another player than us. And then it's just grow. Understand what makes customers happy, do more of that, understand why people are churning, do less of that, and try to make great offers for the customers to keep them engaged, work on launch platforms like Apple TV and LG to close the last gaps of distribution, and then just go straight forward.
Well, this sounds like there's plenty still to do, Andreas. So you've only just begun, as you described before we started. You only just got past the start line, and now you're right into the thick of things. But it is a really exciting journey that you are on. For me, someone who covers a lot of what's going on in the industry, I don't say this just because you're here. I would say that the Dyn approach and the philosophy and the strategy is one of the ones I'm following the most closely, most excited about, because if it does pay off in the way that you are projecting and hoping, then I do think it has a real measurable effect to how the rest of the industry and other markets can approach what they do around second tier, third tier sports rights outside of football and everything else. So, Andreas, thanks so much for joining us and sharing the story, and look forward to catching up with you again soon and hearing what's next.
And whenever you're in Cologne, come by. We got a good coffee.
Thank God for that. I'll be over him on the next flight. Thanks very much, Andreas.
Thank you. Bye.
Before you go, myself and Nick would just like to thank you for tuning into this episode of StreamTime. If you found the episode insightful, please make sure you like and subscribe on whichever platform you listen to. As a growing podcast, we'd greatly appreciate your support in sharing or writing a review. Ultimately, we want this podcast to not only entertain you, but also hopefully help you navigate the digital sports landscape. If you have any feedback on previous episodes or any topics and speakers you'd like to hear from in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find myself and Nick Meacham on LinkedIn or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @SportsProChris1. Nick can be found @SportsProNick. Of course, if you want to stay fully up to date on the sports business news cycle, please make sure to visit the Sports Pro Media website or sign up to one of our several newsletters to make sure you don't miss anything. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to you joining us next week on the StreamTime podcast.